audio is being produced for criminal justice students. And if you heard our first interview, we have another one for you. We're recording live from a prison day room. So let me have our next guest introduce himself. His name is Danny Castro, but I'll let him tell you that himself.
Hi, I'm Danny Castro. I'm in here for DUI.
My name is Shawn Khalifa. You got to know me last time. So, Danny, the first question I have for you today is there such a thing as humane prisons?
All right. It sounds like an oxymoron. So, on the spot, I didn't have time to think about this question, but on the spot, I'm going to say no. Prisons are ancient forms of torture in a sense. They logically don't work, and they obviously don't work as a one-size-fits-all. Might work for some, might not work for others, but I think after thousands of years we can think of something else to make communities and society safer.
So, Danny, what should the future of prisons look like?
I think a better question is, what does the future of criminal justice look like? There doesn't need to be prisons in the future, and as a matter of fact, in the 70s or so, prison populations were in decline before the big boom. So the future of criminal justice would be something that works better. So prisons show that they don't really work the way they have been instituted for I don't know how long, for thousands of years. And what I mean by that is that they don't bring crime down. They don't make communities safer. So we'd have to look into that as far as what criminal justice of the future looks like. Angela Davis has written a book called Prisons Are Obsolete, I think, which I read last year. And she goes into detail about how prisons, for whatever reason, are racist institutions. Now, what that means is that there's not necessarily a small group of people trying to arrest nothing but dark skin or colored people, Hispanics or blacks in the majority for prisons. But what it does mean is that there's mechanisms that are institutionalized throughout the United States that make it so that prisons are mainly full with non-white people. And that looks different from state to state, but there are some states where the prison population is 80% African American, when the state population is definitely not 80% African American. So, no prisons in the future, but far safer communities in the future. This would include hospitals. This would include programs. This would still include something like forceful detainment of dangerous people, but they would definitely not be what we consider prisons. Right now, prisons are places that are put in place for punishment, essentially. And we would punish maybe in the future in an appropriate sense, but for the most part, prisons are not full of people that are just anxious to go commit more crimes. They're full of poor people, uneducated people, people that have come from broken families and addiction and alcoholism. And if we fix those things, our communities would be safer.
Hey, Danny, you said a lot, and one of the most important aspects of what you were talking about was a book you shared. Since we're talking to criminal justice students, can you please say the name of the book one more time and the author?
That's, I believe her name is Angela Davis, Angela Y. Davis. Her book is called Prisons Are Obsolete, and it's a history of prisons in America. It's a small book.
Thank you. Next question. What is the prison experience like?
The prison experience for me personally was defined by how I was treated as a person, as a human being. So I think it's widely known that at this point in 2019, inmates don't have the same human rights that are afforded to citizens. Now, this might make sense to some people because they might think that human rights are forfeited when you come to prison because of some behavior. But that entails that this person had all the free will to not commit their crimes, which is not necessarily the case. I think that for me, the prison experience was a very, very clear feeling that I was not as human as I used to be by the way the officers treated me. Once again, this is not necessarily their fault. They're at the bottom of the chain. They can only do as much as they can do within the circumstances of the realities of prison. When they're in charge of hundreds of inmates, they can't give you all the attention, nor are they social workers or anything like that. So it's not their fault necessarily, but I felt dehumanized right away. I was in a cell with no light, and that wasn't supposed to be the case. The light was not working. The officers were ignoring my request to move to a cell with a light. Sometimes the toilets don't work. You live next to a toilet. You eat by a toilet. I mean, this is stuff I'm a first-timer, so I didn't know anything was going to be like this. I used to be a big supporter of prisons, but when I got here, I realized that the people treated here both morally and emotionally and even medically sometimes are not up to the standards of human rights in general. And I think that's why people consider prisons torture in a sense, because you are desexualized, you are dehumanized, and I'm not sure what the point of it is. I mean, I guess if the point is just pure...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
If it's pure retaliation, I think it makes a little bit of sense, but I don't think not many people believe in pure retaliation anymore.
Yeah, that was powerful, Danny. Especially, the revelation you shared that you used to support prisons, and now that you're in prison, you see the truth of them. So for our final question, what should people on the outside know about people in prison?
Well, I was a person outside, and I didn't know anybody in prison before that. So I guess what I wish I could have told my old self was that prisons are full, not necessarily of people that just can't wait to commit crimes, which I used to think that. I used to think it was just people that love doing crime for the sake of crime, but rather these people, the prisons are full of people that really couldn't help their situation in life. Books like Les Miserables by Victor Hugo illustrate this, where people a lot of times commit crimes because they're in dire circumstances in life, which they couldn't help in the first place. I met people that didn't know their parents. They grew up on the streets. They were 15 years old. They've been in and out of prison since they were 12. They started doing drugs and alcohol at that age, and we just can't expect people that come from such a disadvantaged place to be perfect citizens by the time they're 18 or whenever they're considered to be adults. And so I just wish they knew that there was so much more that we could do before sending people to prison, starting in elementary school and things like that, where there's kids that are going hungry, and this affects their learning, and their learning affects their criminal potential, because if they don't learn, then they're going to be on the streets trying to make money. They're still hungry. They want to, have relationships with people, both romantic or just friendship, and all of these things are things that they don't get, and thus fall into this whole prison cycle. Completely unfair, and it was not up to most of them as far as how they ended up here or how they became the people they became. The people that became good citizens, good people that just never commit crimes and all this, it's the same for them, but in the opposite way. They couldn't help the fact that they had perfect parents or really good household and all the education and food that they ever needed. And so, of course, they wouldn't commit crime, but it was also not up to, it wasn't up to their decision. It was just almost luck of the draw in a sense. That isn't to say that there are dangerous people that make conscious decisions to do crime for the sake of crime, even though they had good upbringings. But even those people many times have mental health issues, which would way better be handled by something other than prisons.
Danny Castro, thank you. One more question. Can you please share your level of education? I had
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
I had a a bachelor's before prison. I was 32 when I came to prison, but I got my bachelor's at the age of 30. And in prison, I got another bachelor's and a master's degree, and I plan to continue my education outside of prison. But just to say this, I came from a privileged background. I'm Hispanic, but I pretty much was in college since I was 18, and just taking it slow and on and off, and living kind of a party life, and until I got caught up with alcoholism at the age of 25 or so. It got really bad. So from then until I came to prison, I was struggling to stay sober. I'm finally sober now for 5 years. But education is key, and I think that if we can focus on educating people at a very, very young age, and despite of giving good education, despite any kind of economic background, we would be far better. And even this college, in politics these days, where free college for everyone, it makes it sound, free college for everyone sounds a little insulting. Like, oh, we're going to give free stuff to the poor people too now. It's insulting to people that just can't afford it and would dream of, can only dream of college. But the fact is, it's not just free college for everyone. It's college for all of society, because all of society would reap the benefits in the end anyway. What this looks like is that all of your family members, all your friends are safer. That means your neighborhoods are safer. People get less likely of getting hurt or having any kind of crime committed on them. It pays for everyone.
That was Danny Castro. This was produced for you. Keep learning.